Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, it amazes me that people aren't interested in really what happened to Bruce Lee. There's a great debate from all the Bruce Lee boys out there. He's the greatest, he's the best, he's everything. Yet they don't really give a damn that he was murdered. And it's pretty clear that he was. The fact that you haven't gotten that from corrupt Hong Kong police authorities is just amusing if you live in that world, because you're not going to get correct information from anybody, no matter where you are in the world. The cover-ups of political murders is endless. It just goes on and on. But it's very clear that Bruce Lee was murdered. He went over to Hong Kong, became a huge success in an industry that is worth a fortune there. Back then, this was a huge industry in Hong Kong, and probably still is. The movie industry is huge in Hong Kong, and people go out and spend their money and watch these martial arts movies, and they have been a rage in Hong Kong for many, many years. And nothing really new happened there. Most of your martial arts stars that came to the United States, a lot of them started there. Sammy Hung, Bruce Lee, of course, and so many other ones. Jackie Chan. So they all started there, and as is the game over there, as it is most places, that you pay the triads. Now, even Steven Seagal was approached by the mafia, and they tried to blackmail him. So the whole idea, in the United States, by the way, and so many other places, from what I understand, with him as well. He even blames the German organized crime, which certainly would be typical. So we have to understand that this bizarre case of him dying at such a young age, who apparently had no physical conditions. He was not taking drugs per se. Now, this is kind of a misnomer because they did find marijuana in his stomach, I guess, and he was a marijuana user, particularly with all the aches and pains. Well, I don't consider marijuana to be one of those drugs. That's like saying, well, we found alcohol in his system. As long as there is a certain percentage of it, so what? I mean, it's nothing. And it's been commonly used for hundreds of years. But he wasn't what we considered something. Now, nobody's ever died from marijuana that I know of, and certainly that didn't cause him a brain hemorrhage. Even though, believe it or not, and too many people think that marijuana is inert, it isn't. You can get headaches and other things from it, but that's not the point. It's not going to kill you. So the whole idea is there was traces of that, so he probably was a marijuana user, and he didn't tell all his Hollywood buddies, including Chucky Norris and all the other people he hang around with, in the early 1960s and late 60s, I guess, whatever that time period there, early 70s, this wasn't really accepted very well in Hollywood. People who smoked marijuana were public about it, like Robert Mitchum, got hell for it. And he was even thrown in prison for a little while. So the whole idea is this is not a joke. So I frankly doubt that Bruce Lee was going around smoking dope all the time talking about it. But he probably did with his closer buddy and pals. Probably not Chuck Norris, who's always been kind of a right-wing conservative, well, pretty much a nut job. So it's hard to believe that James Colburn and Steve McQueen weren't smoking dope in the late 60s, particularly in Hollywood. But we're not talking about drug use, cocaine, heroin, all these things that we are aware of. So the fact of what happened to him was supposedly an adverse reaction to a particular type of relaxant drug because he had a bad headache. Now, this particular drug, it escapes my mind at the moment and is still being sold in different places, is known for this, and you can get a seizure from it. But the whole idea is that it has paralyzed and killed people on their first dosage. It is a great warning for this particular type of drug. Now, the point is he wasn't taking a lot of this. He was given this, probably without his knowledge to a certain degree, by a beautiful actress who he just assumed, and like most male suckers, well, you do anything a pretty woman tells you to. So whether this was applicable to this or not, he was having a bad headache. You take this relaxant, maybe he thought it was some Chinese herb or whatever it was, and the fact is this caused his problem. He also apparently, so the story goes, and we just don't know, had a couple of incidences of passing out while he was filming or having some serious problems that he was taken to the hospital. All of these things are unverified. We just don't know, but they could have been poisoning him ahead of time as well. The plain and simple fact is that he didn't want to pay the triads. He figured he could get away with it being a big movie star. He also probably thought that he could flee back to America and start a real movie career there after all the hoopla about his Chinese films. And of course, he brought in American actors. A lot of them were American actors. Chuck Norris, who else was there? A couple of other ones. John Savage was in Kareem Jabbar there, the big giant guy that he fought. Abdul Jabbar, he was there. So, I mean, these were pretty big names, and he maybe thought he could get away with it. Well, that was not going to be the case, and I think the triads certainly understood that. Understood that he was too big for his britches. Most people who knew Lee at this time knew that he was getting pretty arrogant. He was pretty arrogant towards this time after being what he felt was badly treated by Hollywood, now showed everybody what a big star he was. And I'm not sure that's true either. Here's a guy who you never saw any Orientals on TV, yet he was on Longstreet, he was in the Green Hornet. Well, I'm not sure that's all that bad for someone who is not really known. So he was an actor all his life, and he got some roles there. The fact that he didn't get the TV series Kung Fu is a whole nother issue, and I've done an audio on that, which tells you why. And I will not repeat that here. That's not the point of this particular lecture. The bottom line is that all of a sudden he's dead. He's in a prime physical condition. Some people say, oh, he strained his body. I don't know if he strained his body or not. He was a fanatic. He worked, and some people claim he had a bad back. Another person tells me he didn't have a bad back, that he hurt himself. And of course, this is all part of the realities that were actually talked about him. And some people thought that maybe he was taking drugs because of that bad back and he was in pain all the time. Well, he certainly was taking marijuana, but here we go again. That this is not really a substantial drug. There wasn't any barbiturates found in him, any serious painkillers, apparently. He had a bad reaction to this particular drug that's known to do that. Now, the point is that the entire world is a giant corrupt pot of poo. And certainly Hong Kong is not escaping that. Huge corruption was going on there. So the fact that this happened is even further. Now, I have a follow-up here on Jackie Chan and what he went through with the triad. So if you think that they passed over Bruce Lee because he was something special, well, you're missing the point. And the fact is they've done this to all the martial artists. They just don't talk. Jackie Chan talked, and there were big articles written on this because he wanted it known for his own protection. And this is still up in the air, what's exactly happening. He's a big star. He helps a lot of people, Jackie Chan. And I will give you the details of him in the next lecture. But the bottom line is that Bruce Lee was murdered, and people should be stressing that this kind of corruption needs to stop. And they want to bitch that he didn't get the breaks in Hollywood, he didn't do this, and it was discrimination against him because he was an Asian. And by the way, Bruce Lee was only a fourth German, by the way. He was not full Chinese. And the Chinese didn't consider him valid because of that, nor that he could teach martial arts to white people in general. But the fact, since he wasn't completely Chinese, they didn't. So again, he wasn't respected as you think he was. He came from an acting family. His father was an actor. He was an actor as a child and transferred this to the United States pretty well when he reached the age of 18. And some think he left Hong Kong because of pressures of gangs in Hong Kong. And this again further proves that he could have been killed because people didn't like him. Maybe he was in trouble in the past. And then, of course, he refused to pay. This is plain and simple. So the whole idea is to say, well, he got screwed over because of the Kung Fu television series that was broadcast, I don't know, in the late 60s, or at least whatever it was, because this was some sort of racism. I don't think he could have done that part well at all. Carradine really nailed it with this kind of very low-key philosophical guy that in the end kicked the hell out of you. The other problem is that Bruce Lee did have speaking problems. He was not clear, and Hollywood didn't want to bet on him and put a lot of money into him, plain and simple. So that's the reality of what happened. And anybody that listens to him can understand that he has a horrible, horrible accent. And I don't think that at that time and on national TV, which costs hundreds of millions of dollars for all these shows to get out there, that was necessarily the best bet. And certainly Hollywood has never really taken chances in the past. So, I mean, that's the story there. And that's what the producers of the show stated why he didn't get the show. Plain and simple. So all of that is something to be understood. But these are sidelines. You want to get involved in that. Well, that's something you're going to scream about while he was murdered by his own people in Hong Kong, which is irrefutable. So all you Bruce Lee fans out there, get some balls. Get out there and start talking about the important issues, which is the corruption and what's going on even to this day with Jackie Chan, instead of going back. I mean, you martial artists and martial artists in general that I've met are nothing more than a bunch of cowards, and they stand up for nothing. Well, here's something, hero boys that love him so much and think he's the greatest. Well, why don't you start screaming about his murder, and maybe there should even be an investigation to look what happened here. Maybe you should put your money where your mouth is and do that. Until next time.